When I applied for the PD, I had a bachelor's degree in biology and I had a bachelor's degree in Spanish bilingual education. It seems like it wasn't enough to prove that I belong in that agency.
Welcome to Insider Career Conversations. I'm your host, Sylvia Juárez. As an education and higher ed advocate, I'm dedicated to informing different communities about college readiness and admissions. I'm finding that more and more individuals are interested in non-traditional career paths. This sometimes leads to conversations about career options that aren't in the mainstream or obvious. Insider Career Conversations explores how to get into these niche fields, what trainings and education is needed, and other requirements that can make for a successful career. This season's conversation focuses on law enforcement through community engagement and educational opportunities. My co-host is retired officer Benny Green. Benny and I have partnered to enrich college and career days at middle schools. Our goal has always been to inspire students to explore how law enforcement might be a career for them. Hey Benny, are you ready for today?
Good morning. Of course I am always. I'm up for speaking and talking about law enforcement and community engagement and the like. First, before we go into introducing our special guest, as I've touched on in the past, I've talked about my experiences in law enforcement and how I began and things of that nature. It came about in a situation where I looked around and I saw things that perhaps that I thought needed to be changed or that I could change. I've also talked about how law enforcement was not perhaps my first initial career choice. And that is also something that we can potentially touch on as well later, as how, and we have in the past, of how different people come from different backgrounds to make up law enforcement as well. It's not what a lot of people think, where it's just military or that's just their first career choice and things of that nature. But also, anyway, like as far as I'm concerned, law enforcement means a lot to me. And it's something that I care about because I know that it's something that makes the community safe. It makes the community function along with other entities such as medical field and things of that nature, teaching, etc. But for me, law enforcement is it can be wrapped up almost in one simple term and that one simple word to me, and that's basically to serve. When I say serve, that incorporates things such as protecting, listening, and acting, and just putting your whole heart and soul in something. And that something is the people and the citizens of whatever area you protect, serve, and listen to. I also, as I talked about and spoken in the past, education was a big part of my life. And a lot of officers in this day and age especially are starting to lean that way as well, especially depending on what particular department you like to work for. You don't have to have, as we discussed in the past, an education level past 12th grade, but it's going to definitely help you get hired for sure if you have at least a 2 to 4 year degree.
Thank you, Benny. I appreciate the perspective, and I can tell it's important to you that education be considered as part of what are the opportunities within law enforcement. Let's just set the tone if we can. You've talked to me in the past about what is referred to as the peace officer standards of training, and that seems to be the standard. I'm not sure if in the state or in the nation, but how does that relate to how departments or agencies take on their responsibilities and provide services to their communities?
Sure. Simply put, what POST does is basically dictates what the state of California, you can say each academy and what each department, what trainings that you get. So in other words, they have a curriculum that they set, and that is what needs to be abided by so that California can, stay updated current to what they feel the level of training should be. However, some departments, my old shop, as we call them, department shop, we went well beyond that training. But for my particular department, we went way, way beyond that. And that was part of my role and a part of our guest role as well prior to me even getting there. And as a matter of fact, I got started in part of my role based on what our guest was doing prior to me arriving at the department. And he handed me the reins in that area, and I went from there. And then as I got seasoned and went on for many years in the department, was able to create what has now become, as we have talked about in the past, as the actual community engagement officer position.
That I think is important, at least as individuals looking for what an agency specifically will do for me. Is this something that I can ask in an interview if I'm looking at law enforcement as something that I'm going to move into? what type of post training do you do in this area? Like, for example, profiling or community activism. Is that something that you can ask?
Yes, indeed, because that's something that officers are getting. They're getting that training. So you have to say, for instance, you have to have so many refresher course hours once you get into a department of certain things, whatever it may be. It may be driving, it may be de-escalation, it may be training when it comes down to racial profiling, it could be domestic violence. But you're going to get X amount of training every so many years that you have to have, and it's documented and logged, and you have your own post ID number, etc., so they can keep up with what trainings you're completing. These trainings often are actually hands-on. They're also via computer or laptop that you can train, and they're also like you can go to classes and things of that nature.
Gotcha. So I'm going to jump the gun and I'm going to introduce Sergeant Acuna. I don't have the history that you do with him, Benny, but I think each time I've talked to him, he has been someone that I have great admiration for in just his story. So, Sergeant Acuna, thank you so much for joining us here and having the conversation about your position with law enforcement.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Benny. And so, yeah, everything's been great in regards to getting a little bit of my word out and using you guys to maybe motivate and maybe be of service to those that are starting their career in law enforcement.
If I can ask you to start with your educational background, just because it's fascinating to me how you started off your undergrad in one way, ended up doing something else, because I come across a lot of students that are in college or in university. They have a really hard time thinking about what am I going to do for the rest of my life because they started off with a particular major and feel like they have to stick to it, or they don't know how to be true to what they want to do. So I'm super excited to hear you talk about your educational history.
With me, it was interesting because I was always fascinated by medicine. Was fascinated by anatomy, doctors, nurses. I saw that as the ultimate service to another human being. And since I was a little kid, I love watching movies that involve medicine. So my whole path, my career path through junior high, high school, and even college was medical. It was pre-med biology and volunteering and working at hospitals and being an EMT, driving an ambulance. So my whole career path was on that. As I went through my career experiences in college, I realized that service was what my calling was. Service to people, just giving them the time. And I realized that the time was important in how you provided that time to those who you came in contact with. And I needed a job, so I was working at that time for the police department at the campus. I realized that I could be of help to certain groups in the community, even as a student. And that kind of gave me the insight that my calling was service. But as I continue working at the police department and at the same time prepping for to get into medical school, I realized that life brings some challenges and some changes that will make you think about, are you going to change paths for the better of the family, for the better of yourself, for the better of the community? And that opportunity came for me to go to the academy. It was offered. I declined it at first because at that time I was still on my path to get into medical school. I had a conversation with my old chief, and I always tell people that I got tricked into it because he said just put in for it, and then it'll help you with your medical school boards and interviews, and that's what I ended up doing. I ended up applying, and the next minute I'm hired. I made the choice. I discussed it with my back then my girlfriend and my mom. My dad had passed away, so my mom was very supportive. She actually said, "It's your life. You need to follow your instinct, your opportunities, and you do whatever you think is going to be good for you in the long run." At that time, my girlfriend was a little bit more bad because most of her brothers were from the Chicano movement. So they had a little bit of a controversy with law enforcement. At the end of the day, I made a promise to her and I told her if I change my personality because I go into this and I change my value system, you bring it to my attention and I would leave law enforcement because I don't want to lose my own character. I don't want to lose my own value system. I want to be of service. And if I'm not being of service and I'm not being productive in the community in that manner, then I need to leave that career. So she supported me after that. So I ended up going to the academy at Golden West. And this is in the 90s. So there was a big controversy during that time because the war was us against them, us, the law enforcement, against the public. When I got hired, my chief, Mike Michel, at that time, told me directly that he was hiring me for one reason, and that was to create a bridge between us and the community, us and the students. And since I was a student there, he was putting that weight on me to create that because he knew that there was a disconnect with our staff and faculty and our student population. So I dedicated myself to walking the beat, talking to the students, having conversations with them about their problems. There's more good people out here that we could talk and communicate and be of service and in their bridges to information that are going to help us solve all their problems before they become problems. There are bridges that are going to call us and tell us, hey, there's this individual that's having a mental breakdown that you probably need to deal with before he gets out of hand. And a lot of the programs that are in the colleges, they're there for those reasons so we could reach out. In law enforcement, I think we were missing that point that we could reach out and use all these programs to help us solve future problems and deal actually with the problems that really we needed to deal with as law enforcement, like investigations of sexual assaults or maybe alcohol or drug abuse that was happening in some of the colleges. And I think that was an inspiration for me that the chief gave me to create that bridge. I was able to talk to him and to tell him that I needed more officers with that mentality. I needed more officers that had life experiences um, beyond, just coming from a family that was middle class. I needed officers that had struggled in school, that had struggled with their families, they struggled in their communities as they were growing up, and they could change that mentality of how they looked at us under that uniform. And as we hire officers like Benny Green, I needed to pass some of these responsibilities because I knew I was preparing myself to leave, and I was taking other responsibilities like the FDO program. I was doing special events, mutual aids, and I did the schedule for 25 years. So I was doing a lot of these other assignments. I was a little prejudiced when it came down to that. I wanted somebody that had kind of the same life experiences I had because I knew they would understand where I was coming from and why this community engagement was so important to us as an agency.
Sergeant, can I ask a quick question? Just because you're touching on something that's really important. I think with both you and Benny, as men of color, I think as someone who's part of the community, when I think of law enforcement, because you wear the same uniform, I think you guys are connected immediately because of what you represent with that uniform versus what you're explaining to me. And I'm curious to know what you and Benny kind of saw in each other, or maybe how you guys connected and how that helped you get through.
When Benny and I saw each other, and we didn't talk that much at the beginning. We kind of just saw each other, and it was instant respect. And I think it was a respect of how we grew up. And I think that that's important because a lot of the stereotypes is that in the 90s we were coming in because they needed people of color in the departments and not really looking at the fact that we were actually qualified candidates. When I applied for the PD, I had a bachelor's degree in biology and I had a bachelor's degree in Spanish bilingual education. It seems like it wasn't enough to prove that I belong in that agency. Same thing with Benny. I think with Benny came in with a degree and with some life experiences that most of those adults that were there had never even been around. So I think, but when Benny and I came in contact, that's what was one of the things that we had in common, that we had those experiences and we had that respect. That was one of my toughest lessons, if I have to say, my learning experiences, navigating through a department that had this view about people that came from our communities, Compton, Linwood, Southgate, LA County in general. He went through some stuff that I had to do some fighting behind the doors to kind of get him off his back. But Benny is a grown man, and he understood the politics, and he understood that some of the stuff was worth fighting, and some of the stuff was worth keeping and watching, so we could bring it up at a later time and fix it. And it was going to be a long term solution, not a solution that was going to happen right on the spot.
Right.
Everything that Sergeant is saying is correct. One of the things, though, for me is when I got there, and he helped me navigate through things because I didn't know the culture. I came from other law enforcement agencies where it was a lot different. But also, he helped me navigate through things because I'm very, like you said, I'm my own man. I'm very direct, and if I don't like you, I'll let you know. And I'm not going to say it behind your back. I'm going to tell you in your face. And I don't care what stripes you have or what your position is. If you're the chief, if I don't like you, I'll let you know. I don't have a problem with that. So because I'm like that, that doesn't fly where we were working. It flies because I never changed. I was my way. I was that way the whole time I worked there until I retired. But that was not the norm at all. And I wouldn't advise most people to do their careers like I did mine. I wouldn't advise anybody, to be honest with you. But that being said, because I was like that, he did help me and he did fight for me behind closed doors, if you will. And like he did say, when we were coming on and after that, it was you were looked upon because we need some diversity in our building or in our department. You're not getting hired because you actually have the skill set to do the job or you have the various knowledge and degrees and these things. That was looked upon like, okay, whatever. All I need you to do, because you're probably not that intelligent, just don't get in trouble. Don't make the department look bad. And when we need some knuckle draggers, we'll call you. And it's like, no, that's not what I'm about. I'm not a knuckle dragger. I can be one, but that's not who I am. That's the last resort. I'm not into that unless I have to be. He's not into that unless he has to be. We were doing de-escalation before that was even talked about.
Exactly.
Because we brought that to the table when we came, just as human beings. In my opinion, that should not even have to be taught to you. You know what I mean? But of course it does because we all come from different backgrounds, different walks of life, et cetera, and different experiences. And one of the things I will touch on this as well, when new officers would come into the department, they go through a process of 2 weeks of different trainings and things of that nature. Eladio was responsible for training us when we came in diversity. Well, he gave that to me and I took over that. And then, like I said, I ran with that for a few years. And about a year and a half to 2 years passed by. And that's when we got to work together and we started doing mutual aids and going out. And then I started really watching him, how he navigated with other departments and how he moved with them. And when they were lacking in areas, he wasn't trying to say, hey, I know more than you. He was just trying to say, hey, you might want to try it a different way or this way or that way. And that's how we do it sometimes if you like. And that's why he was so respected. So that's what he brought to the table.
I'm really hearing what you're saying to me here, gentlemen, in terms of the idea of growing engagement, right? Because you're almost doing it in two ways. You're doing it internally with the individuals you're working with and who you see are really a fit for what you're trying to get to, not where we're at, but where you're trying to get to. And I really do see through the course of this particular season, Benny, how you have impacted, how Sergeant has impacted, and the next generation is really taking that in. What do you see or would like to see that the next generation does in terms of law enforcement?
It's kind of interesting. I did a lot of interviews with new applicants at the end of my career, and I was seeing the cultural changes, personality changes of young men and women that were entering law enforcement. And there's a couple of things that you have to be genuine. You have to, when you're talking to somebody and you're giving them your time, that you really care, not that you're putting the mask that I do care what your issue is. I think we're losing a lot of that because we're trying to follow this protocol, these policies and these procedures, and there are a lot of times they really don't get that person. Now with the body cams, that's also has a negative impact on how we talk to people in regards to having that conversation, that honest conversation, because now everything's being taped. A lot of times you cannot give that break. You cannot give that advice because you're placing yourself maybe on liability or not being able to have that candid conversation to say, hey, you might want to go this direction because if not, you're going to end up in jail because you're not supposed to give advice. There's a little things that need to be tweaked. Benny and I came from a generation where if you needed to resolve an issue, you discussed it and sometimes you put hands on. We were not afraid to put hands on people before pulling our guns out, before pulling our baton out.
Exactly.
It was okay for us to put hands and calm people down before it got out of hand. Now, the new generations, they do training on their own, but they really haven't had that experience of the inner city where there's a different way of handling problems that are more healthier than pulling your gun and shooting at somebody. And it's a concept that people are going to have to start looking into that area of training. But we need to still to continue to train our officers. They're very well educated now. They're coming out of college. Most of the applicants, I would say, that are applying in law enforcement, they have a bachelor's degree or a master's. There's very few that have AAs or they got hired because they were part of the department working as a young adults. Also, agencies have gone away from doing a lot of range training. They don't do a lot of range training because they say, well, how many shootings do we really get? Well, in reality, you do need that range training, and you need it a lot more because then that helps the officers make those decisions not to pull the gun out. You do the range training so you don't have to pull the gun out. You feel confident. So you feel confident that if you do pull it out, that you can know how to use it. Unfortunately, and this has been my experience with some of the officers, is that they don't have the technical skills to use their hands, when to use them, what is their standing on the call, and the same thing with the handgun. We, and I say we, Benny and I, because of the area that we grew up and where we come from, we know how to read people really well. We know, okay, this is a threat, or this is just a person just venting. And a lot of times, people that don't have those experiences, when people are venting, they think it's a threat to them,
Right,
and
right.
that's when it escalates to the areas that should have never gone.
And I think one of the things you guys have informally touched on has been communication. And I think one of the things you're touching on is that there's also nonverbal communication that happens, I would assume, in an instance where there's a situation that might be escalating, but body language might be saying that a person may have some other type of distress other than what's happening right then and there. So that you can read that person and then, like you said, determine how it is that you need to approach them.
I'll say this in closing. Two things. Number one, as a department, when officers go through the academy, when you hire them, and everybody's on their best behavior when they're hired, when they're in the interview, obviously. But once you hire them, if you choose to, and they go to the academy and they're successful, and you get them, you have them. And the people that come and put in an application at your department, you don't have any control over that. You may know somebody and you may advise them if they'd like to work there, etc. But generally speaking, by and large, it's not like, for example, a professional team where they need a position, so they go out and draft that
Ah,
position.
yes,
You
yes.
get what you get. And then you have to mold and you have to train them. Like I said, posts will have certain trainings that they have to go through, but you need to incorporate that extra training because, like he said, we all come from different walks of life and different experiences, and also age. We're
Yep.
we're in our 50s working with 20-year-olds, you know. So it's a lot of nuances and things that are going on and different little things going on within the department. So we get what we get, and then it's up incumbent on the department to train these people and to get them up to speed. And that's where that extra training comes in. If you want to have that kind of department that stands out for good reasons, there are going to be mistakes made. We're not robots. There are going to be issues that arise, but you're going to get less of those when you have the right people that you're potentially hiring. But once they're hired, making sure that they know what they're doing in all facets and they're competent and they feel secure in who they are and what they're doing.
Danny, you hit it right on the thing. You have to make sure that your people are competent. You have to make sure that you have a diverse workforce. And individually, you have to bring to the table your strong points and you have to reach out for your weak points to others to help you out.
Right.
The ego has to be put aside when you're working in law enforcement. And there's a lot of egos. You have to put that ego aside. You have to be humble. And it doesn't mean that you're weak. It means that you're very strong when you have humility, because that's how you keep yourself and others from getting in trouble.
And I think that's a little bit more of that practice that has to be out there, is that we are our brother's keeper. We are out here looking out for each other because we're in this world together. We're in this society together. You do have to look out for each other, your neighbors, your family, your friends. And sometimes it's challenging because you have your own things going on. But at the same time, when you do get to the point where you reach out or come in contact with law enforcement, it shouldn't be someone that you fear. It should be someone that you know is going to be able to support and assist you for that first time encounter or that multiple time encounter or whatever the case may be. When you reach out to any type of law enforcement or you're being asked to provide something because it's the responsibility of that individual to ask you that because they're enforcing a policy, it doesn't mean that that person has something against you. It's that this is just the way that we live in our community with certain norms.
Exactly. And not only that, I mean, remember that a lot of the officers, and I work with many through the whole state of California, they all care. They all care about helping. They want to be helpful. Now, some of them, they go out of line like any other profession. They're just like you. They just got to maintain this standard. And I'll tell you, the standards for officers in California, at least, I could tell you this, they're high. They're very high. In the culture, if you're having problems with your department, that's because the leadership is setting up that culture.
Right. Well, gentlemen, talk about wanting to get some feedback from the veterans. You two have definitely given us some OG love. I hope you're okay with me bringing it there. But I do, seriously want to thank you for your time today, but also more importantly, all those years that you served and you made sure that your job was held up to the highest of integrity. Hopefully in the future we can sit down and talk a little shop where you can tell me more about your adventures, because I'm sure there's plenty of stories that you two are not sharing with us today. But thank you again, Sergeant Acuna. Benny, as always learning with you. That's why one of my biggest assets in our friendship is that you're willing to break it down, be honest, and there's no bullshit behind it.
Oh, no,
Ditto.
there isn't any.
To everyone else, stay tuned for more insider career conversations that showcase career paths within law enforcement. We appreciate you listening and look forward to next time.
Insider Career Conversations is a production of Juárez Consulting. For more information, you can visit juarezconsultinginc.com. This episode was produced by Sylvia Juárez Magana, with production help and editing by Kazmira Hall.